Well, well, well. Look who they couldn't figure out. Look who they spent years studying, dissecting, labeling, and still got completely wrong. You strange, silent, terrifyingly brilliant creature, welcome back. Or better yet, welcome to the part of yourself they were never smart enough to understand. Because what they called weird, what they whispered about at tables you weren't sitting at, what made them uncomfortable in your presence and restless in your absence, that wasn't a flaw. That was the architecture of a mind they didn't have the vocabulary to describe. And the fact that they couldn't name it scared them more than anything else ever could. Before we begin, if this frequency already lives in you, 2 books were written for exactly that mind. The Crown of Ash, Grim Grit Edition, The Quiet Edge, Grim Grit Edition 2. Links in the description. Now let's get into it. Let's be honest about what actually happened. They saw the way your brain worked, and it unsettled them. They saw you pause where others rushed. They saw you notice things no one else caught. They saw you sit quietly in a room full of noise and somehow hear something deeper than the sound. And instead of asking what you were hearing, they decided something was wrong with you. That is what people do when they encounter a frequency they cannot tune into. They don't question the radio. They call the signal broken. They called you broken. But here you are, still transmitting, still receiving, still picking up signals from depths they will never reach. You have been called too quiet, too intense, too much and not enough simultaneously. You have been told you think too deeply, feel too sharply, and analyze too precisely. You have been handed the word weird like it was a diagnosis, like it was something you needed to be cured of, like your mind was a problem requiring a solution. But no one ever told you the truth. The truth is this: every single person who ever called you weird was standing in the presence of a genius and had absolutely no idea what they were looking at. They were holding a rare frequency in their hands and calling it static. There is a specific kind of loneliness that comes with having a mind like yours. It is not the loneliness of being alone in a room. It is the loneliness of being in a room full of people and realizing, slowly and then all at once, that no one is thinking the way you are thinking. No one is following the thread you are following. No one sees the pattern you already mapped out 3 conversations ago, and so you stop talking. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you already know they won't follow you there. And that silence gets mistaken for arrogance, or strangeness, or both. They thought you were distant. What you actually were was already ahead. They thought you were difficult. What you actually were was precise. They thought you were cold. What you actually were was exhausted from translating yourself into a language that kept losing meaning by the time it arrived. Because that is what genius costs. It costs you the easy conversations. It costs you the comfortable smallness. It costs you the nod of recognition from people who simply do not have the depth to meet you where you live. And you paid that price without even understanding that it was a price, because you never chose to be this way. You were just built different, wired different, and the world told you that was something to be ashamed of. But here is what no one explained to you when you were sitting alone at lunch, or being talked over in meetings, or watching everyone else laugh at a joke you had already dismantled in your head before the punchline landed. The cost of being different is not evidence of wrongness. The cost of being different is the tuition. And every year you paid it. Every year you sat in that specific silence and held your mind still and decided to stay anyway. You were earning something they will never be able to buy. You were earning the kind of depth that changes everything. For you, and eventually for the world around you. The ones who called you weird were not wrong that you were different. They were wrong about what different meant. Different, to a fearful mind, means broken. Different, to a perceptive mind, means rare. And rare things are not comfortable. Rare things do not blend in. Rare things make people feel something they cannot articulate, and so they reach for the nearest ugly word and throw it. They threw it at you. For years, some of them threw it, and you carried it like it was true. But it was never true. It was just the only word they had for something they could not measure. Here is a secret they do not teach in any classroom. Genius, in real life, does not look the way it looks in films. It does not arrive in a blaze of obvious brilliance with everyone applauding and lights overhead. In real life, genius looks awkward. Genius looks restless. Genius looks like someone who cannot sit still in a conversation that is moving too slowly. Genius looks like someone who changes the subject because they already processed the previous one and are 3 subjects ahead. Genius looks, from the outside, almost exactly like what they called you. Odd, distant, intense, hard to read. The geniuses of every era were the most misread people of their time. The people who changed how the world understood itself were almost always first dismissed by the world they were about to change. They were called impractical. They were called dreamers, in the hollow, dismissive sense of that word. They were called too sensitive, too theoretical, too obsessed with things that didn't matter yet. The yet is the entire story. What they were obsessed with always mattered. It just hadn't become undeniable to everyone else in the room. You are living in your yet. The undeniable part is still forming, but it is forming. Think about the way your mind actually operates when no one is grading it. Think about the connections you make that no one asked you to make. Think about the questions you ask that make people uncomfortable because the questions expose something true that everyone else agreed not to look at directly. Think about the way you cannot stop a thought once it starts. Think about the way certain ideas root themselves so deeply in you that you lie awake not from anxiety, but from the weight of something trying to be understood. That is not a disorder. That is not a quirk. That is the architecture of a mind that was built to go further than the average stop. And yes, it is exhausting. No one is going to pretend otherwise. It is exhausting to feel everything at full volume when everyone around you seems to be living at a murmur. It is exhausting to care about precision in a world that rewards approximation. It is exhausting to see what is coming before it arrives and have no one believe you until it has already happened. But exhaustion is not defeat. Exhaustion is evidence. It is proof of how hard you work inside a mind that never fully stops. And that never stopping mind, that is the engine of everything that is coming for you. You have been noticing things since before you had the language for what you were noticing. You picked up on the inconsistency in someone's story before anyone else did. You felt the shift in a room's energy before any single thing had changed visibly. You saw the outcome of a situation playing forward in your mind while everyone around you was still reacting to the beginning. You tried to say something about it sometimes, and people looked at you like you had invented the concern, like you were being paranoid or dramatic or reading too much into things. Then exactly what you described happened, and somehow they still didn't update their opinion of you. That is the specific cruelty of the perceptive mind. You see the thing, you say the thing happens, and somehow the credit does not go where the vision did. Instead they say, you got lucky. Instead they say it was obvious. Instead they quietly absorb what you gave them, carry it forward, and forget that you were the one who stood there seeing it first, while everyone else was still arguing about whether there was anything to see. This is not a small thing. This is not a grievance. This is a pattern that matters, because what it reveals is that your vision is real, your perception is real, and the world around you is consistently catching up to a place you already were. The patterns you see are not accidents of overthinking. Overthinking is what the underprepared mind calls the prepared mind working at speed. When your brain cycles through 40 possibilities before someone else has considered 5, that is not anxiety dressed up as intelligence. That is processing power. That is the thing that makes certain people dangerous in the most productive sense of the word. The sense that means they cannot be fooled as easily. The sense that means they will find the leverage point in a system faster than anyone else in the room. The sense that means when something actually matters, you want them thinking, and you have always been that person. In every room, every situation, every problem that landed in your life. You were the one running the deeper calculation. Sometimes you hit it. Sometimes you learned to perform the slower version of yourself so people would feel more comfortable. Sometimes you deliberately dimmed the frequency because being fully on was more socially costly than you could afford at that particular moment. And even then, even running at half capacity, you still caught what others missed. Imagine, just for a moment, what you catch when you stop dimming it. They told you that you were too sensitive. They said it like it was a warning, like it was a vulnerability they were kindly alerting you to, like they were doing you a favor by pointing out the crack in your structure. But sensitivity and intelligence are not separate things. They are the same system operating through different channels. The same neural architecture that lets you feel an atmosphere shift when you walk into a room is the same architecture that lets you understand a complex idea from multiple angles simultaneously. They are not different gifts. They are the same gift, expressed in two directions. The most perceptive people in every field, in every discipline, in every creative and analytical domain the world has ever produced, were sensitive people who learned to use that sensitivity as data rather than wound. They felt things sharply. They felt betrayal deeply, injustice viscerally, beauty almost physically. And that sharpness, rather than crippling them, gave them access to a richness of experience that the so-called tougher people around them simply could not reach. Their art was richer. Their analysis was richer. Their understanding of other human beings was richer, because they paid attention with their entire nervous system rather than just their surface mind. When they told you to toughen up, what they were actually asking you to do was to become less accurate. They were asking you to sand down the very instrument that allows you to read the world most precisely. They were asking you to be worse at the thing you are actually built for, in exchange for being more comfortable at a dinner table or a group conversation. And some part of you, the part that just wanted to belong, almost agreed. Some part of you spent years trying to feel less, notice less, care less, because caring that much seemed to cost too much. But you couldn't do it. You couldn't turn it off. Because it isn't something you do, it is something you are. And that refusal to stop feeling, that stubborn, relentless sensitivity that survived every attempt to blunt it, that is one of the most precise things about you. You did not let them make you into someone who moves through the world half-registered. You stayed fully arrived in every moment, even when every moment cost you something. And that staying, that full presence in your own experience, even when experience was painful, is what built the depth in you that makes you genuinely different from the people who told you there was something wrong with how much you felt. Let's talk about what you actually did with all of that time they thought you were wasting. The hours you were in your own head, the silence they called antisocial, the solitude they called isolation. Because you were not absent, you were constructing. You were building frameworks inside yourself that most people spend a lifetime looking for outside themselves. You were developing a relationship with your own mind that most people never get to, because most people are too afraid of what lives in the deep water of their own thinking to ever go there and stay. You went there, you stayed, and yes, sometimes it was uncomfortable. Sometimes the deep water was cold and dark and you came up gasping and told yourself you wouldn't go back. But you always went back. Because something in you understood, even before you had the words for it, that the work being done in that silence was the most important work of your life. The ideas being forged in that solitude were sharper than anything that gets built in the noise. The understanding being constructed in that stillness was more durable than anything assembled in the rush of performance and approval. The world does not reward the inner work while it is happening. It only rewards the results once they are undeniable in public. And so for years, maybe for most of your life so far, you have been doing the kind of work that earns no applause in real time. You have been doing the deeply private, deeply serious labor of becoming someone who actually understands something. Not just someone who sounds intelligent at the right moments, but someone who is genuinely, structurally, bone-deep intelligent. And that kind of intelligence takes the time it takes. It cannot be rushed. It cannot be performed. It has to be built, and you have been building it. So when they dismissed the time you spent thinking as time wasted, when they told you to get out of your head, when they made you feel like the internal life you were living was a form of avoidance rather than a form of construction, they were wrong about the most fundamental thing. They thought the stillness was emptiness. It was never emptiness. It was a workshop, and the things being made inside it are going to outlast every opinion that was formed about you on the surface. Here is the part that is uncomfortable to say, but too important to leave out. The people who tried hardest to convince you that something was wrong with you were almost always the people who had the most to lose if you ever fully understood how capable you were. Because your full capability is a mirror, and what it reflects back is the gap between what they settled for and what was actually possible. The moment you stop apologizing for your mind is the moment their choices become visible by contrast. And that visibility, that undeniable comparison, is something small people cannot survive. They needed you to stay confused. They needed you to keep questioning yourself, keep second-guessing your perceptions, keep circling back to the same doubts they planted precisely because doubt is the one thing that slows a mind like yours all the way down. A confident genius is unstoppable. A confused genius is manageable. And so they worked consistently, sometimes consciously, and sometimes just through the casual cruelty of people who do not examine their own motives, to keep you in the zone of confusion. To keep you asking, is something wrong with me, instead of asking, what am I actually capable of? The people who called you too much were always the people who were not enough. The people who called you too intense were always the people who had never committed to anything with full force. The people who called you too deep were always the people who were afraid of what they would find if they ever stopped skimming the surface of their own lives. And so they looked at your depth and they called it a problem. They looked at your intensity and they called it a flaw. They looked at the full, burning, relentless reality of your mind and decided that what they were looking at was wrong, because the alternative that they might be the incomplete ones, was something they simply could not afford to know. But here is what they miscalculated. They thought if they made you doubt yourself long enough, you would eventually agree with them. They thought repetition would become reality. They thought the sheer weight of their collective opinion would eventually compress your understanding of yourself into a shape that fit their comfort level. What they did not account for is what you actually are. What they did not account for is the specific quality of a mind that has been tested by difficulty and emerged not broken but clarified. What they did not account for is that pressure, applied to the right kind of material, does not crush it, it sharpens it. The education system was not built for you. That is not a comfortable thing to say, but it is an accurate one. The education system was built for the median, for the repeatable, for the mind that absorbs information in a linear sequence and can produce it back on demand in a standardized format. And your mind does not work that way. Your mind works through connection, through pattern, through the sudden lateral leap that takes two things that seem unrelated and finds the invisible thread between them. Your mind works through deep immersion in things that interest you, and almost complete disengagement from things that do not. That is not a learning disability. That is a different kind of intelligence architecture. The things you learned fastest were the things no one taught you in a classroom. The things you understand most deeply are the things you arrived at through your own relentless questioning, your own circling, your own refusal to accept the surface answer when the deeper answer was clearly still down there waiting. You have always been a self-directed mind in a system that rewards following directions. And the gap between what you were built to do and what you were asked to do created a friction that got mistaken for incompetence. It was never incompetence. It was incompatibility. There is an enormous difference. The grades they gave you were not a measurement of your intelligence. They were a measurement of how well your intelligence aligned with the specific format of measurement being used. And the format was always the wrong one for the way you think. The tests were always optimized for a kind of thinking you were not built to perform at its best. And so you walked away from institutions carrying scores and assessments that told a story about you that was structurally incapable of being accurate. You walked away from a measuring system that didn't have a unit of measurement that corresponded to what you actually had. And somewhere in you, you knew it. Even when no one else believed it, some part of you always knew the score was wrong. The intelligence that actually lives in you is the kind that shows up in real problems, in real situations, in the moments when the framework fails and someone has to think outside of it. It shows up when the map stops matching the territory and someone has to navigate anyway. It shows up in the midnight insight, in the problem that has stumped everyone else for weeks, until the moment you sit down with it alone and something in your mind reaches out and simply touches the answer. That kind of intelligence does not score well on standardized tests, but it does the things that matter most when the stakes are highest. You have always understood people better than most of them understood themselves. You watched, from a very early age, the way people performed versus the way people actually were. You noticed the gap between the story someone told about themselves and the story their behavior was telling simultaneously. You watched people claim values they didn't hold and disown feelings they were obviously experiencing. You saw the subtext running under the text, the secondary motive moving behind the stated one, the real wound being protected by the elaborate constructed personality on top of it. And you understood, even if you couldn't articulate it, what all of it meant. This made you strange to people, because when you see someone that clearly, you cannot pretend not to. You cannot sit across from someone and perform the social fiction that you believe the performance they are giving. Something in you is always reading the deeper layer. Something in you is always tracking the thing no one said, and people feel that. Even when they cannot name it, even when they have no conscious awareness that they are being perceived at the level they are being perceived at, they feel it, and it makes them uncomfortable. Because being truly seen, not the version of yourself you present, but the actual version, is one of the most uncomfortable human experiences. So they called you intense. They called you strange. They said you made them feel a certain way they couldn't explain, and that feeling was not entirely comfortable. What they were describing was the experience of being in the presence of someone who was actually paying attention. Not the social surface kind of attention, the real kind. The kind that misses nothing and forgets nothing and connects what it finds into a picture that is, more often than not, significantly more accurate than the picture the subject has of themselves. That is not a social disadvantage. That is a profound and rare human capacity, and you have had it since before you knew what to do with it. The question now is not whether you have this capacity. The question is what you are going to do with it, now that you understand what it is. Because a mind that can read people, read systems, read patterns, read the thing beneath the thing, is not a mind built for a small life. It is not a mind built for the background. It is a mind built for the exact work of the moment you are currently living in, which is the work of figuring out what is real, what is true, and what the actual shape of the territory looks like under all the maps that have been drawn wrong.